I speak 10 languages, the young woman said, her hands cuffed. The judge burst out laughing. Sure, and I'm a polyglot, he sneered, facing the entire court. But when she opened her mouth, his laughter froze. The U.S. District courtroom had never been so full. Every seat occupied, people standing against the walls, journalists with cameras off, waiting for the exact moment to capture the day's news. The collective murmur created a symphony of expectation that vibrated the air conditioning in the old courthouse. Valerie Hayes walked toward the stand, her hands cuffed. Her steps echoed in the sudden silence that fell when bailiff David Jenkins called out, "All rise. The court is now in session." Everyone stood as Judge Arthur Sterling entered through the side door, carrying a messy stack of documents. He was a robust man, with perfectly combed gray hair, and that kind of expression only years of sentencing others can sculpt onto a face. A mix of boredom, superiority, and occasional disdain. "You may be seated," Sterling ordered, dropping the documents onto his desk with a dry thud that startled several people present. Valerie remained standing between two bailiffs with Sarah Miller, her public defender, to her left. Sarah was a middle-aged woman, carrying the weight of too many cases and too little budget. She had pronounced dark circles under her eyes, and that barely perceptible tremor in her hands that betrays excessive caffeine and lack of sleep. "Case number 4, 7B, 2024, announced the court clerk. The state name versus Valerie Hayes. Charges, wire fraud, identity theft, and aggravated grand larceny. The murmur returned to the room like a wave. Valerie felt hundreds of eyes piercing her back, judging her before any evidence was presented. She knew that feeling. She had felt it her entire life. Assistant District Attorney Mark Harrison rose with theatrical movements, adjusting his tie as if he were an actor at a play's premiere. He was a thin man with sharp features, who spoke with that East Coast elite accent that immediately establishes hierarchies in any room. "Your Honor," Harrison began with a resonant voice, "we have before us a young woman who has perpetrated one of the most elaborate frauds this court has ever seen. For months, Miss Hayes posed as a certified translator, offering services to multinational corporations, educational institutions, and even government agencies." He paused dramatically, walking slowly in front of the jury. "She charged thousands of dollars for translations she allegedly performed in 10 different languages. 10, Your Honor. But the reality is, this young woman barely finished high school and possesses no certification, no degree, no credentials to support her supposed linguistic ability." Harrison turned to Valerie with a smile that intended to be compassionate but oozed condescension. "We understand that financial need can lead people to make wrong choices, but fraud is fraud, regardless of the circumstances." Valerie clenched her fists inside the cuffs. Every word from the prosecutor was like a hammer hitting her dignity, not because they were true, but because no one seemed interested in hearing her side. Judge Sterling glanced at the documents with a bored expression, as if this were just another case on his endless list of judicial responsibilities. He yawned without bothering to cover his mouth. "Does the defense have anything to say before we proceed?" he asked in a monotonous tone, without even looking up from his papers. Sarah Miller cleared her throat. Her hands trembled as she held her worn notepad. "Your Honor, my client maintains her innocence. The charges presented are based on misunderstandings and lack of communication with her employers. Miss Hayes is willing to demonstrate that she possesses the abilities she claims to have." "Demonstrate?" Sterling finally looked up, his eyebrows arching with mocking interest. "And how exactly do you plan to prove she speaks 10 languages? Will she sing us a song in each one?" Some nervous laughter rippled through the public. The judge smiled, pleased with his own humor. "Your Honor, with due respect," Sarah tried to continue, but Sterling interrupted her with a wave of his hand. "Miss Miller, I've reviewed this case. Your client is 23 years old. She grew up in a disadvantaged neighborhood, and, according to records, she worked cleaning offices before this supposed translation business." He looked directly at Valerie. "There is no record of higher education, no international certification, nothing to suggest this young woman could speak even 3 languages, much less 10. It was then that Valerie raised her head. Her eyes, which had remained fixed on the floor throughout the hearing, met the judge's directly. There was fire in that gaze. There were years of humiliation, of being underestimated, of being invisible. "Permission to speak, Your Honor," she said with a clear, firm voice. Sterling looked at her, surprised. Most defendants remained silent during preliminary hearings, letting their lawyers speak for them. But there was something in the way this young woman looked at him that caused a mix of irritation and curiosity. Do you have anything relevant to add to the case? He asked with a skeptical tone. I speak 10 languages. Valerie pronounced each word with crystal clarity, without an ounce of doubt in her voice. And I can prove it right here, right now, if Your Honor permits me. The silence that followed was so profound that one could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights on the ceiling. Everyone present leaned forward, as if the universe itself was holding its breath. And then Judge Arthur Sterling did something no one expected. He threw his head back and let out a roar of laughter. It wasn't polite or restrained laughter. It was a thunderous, almost hysterical guffaw that made his corpulent figure vibrate on the bench. "This is incredible!" he exclaimed between laughs, wiping tears from his eyes with a handkerchief. "The defendant wants to demonstrate that she speaks 10 languages here in my court." Other laughs joined the judges. Prosecutor Harrison smiled broadly, shaking his head in disbelief. Some members of the public laughed openly, others whispered mocking comments. "Miss Hayes." Sterling managed to control his laughter enough to speak, though his voice still trembled with amusement. "I appreciate your creativity, but this is a court of law, not a television talent show. We are not going to waste the court's time with circus demonstrations. Does justice seem like a circus to you?" Valerie's voice cut through the air like a knife. The judge's laughter froze instantly. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, a dangerous silence filled the room. "Excuse me?" His voice dropped to a threatening tone. Valerie took a step forward. Ignoring the warning tug, Sarah Miller gave her arm. "With all due respect, Your Honor, you just laughed at me without listening. You have judged me without allowing me to present my defense. If that's not a circus, I don't know what is." Bailiff Jenkins stepped forward, ready to intervene if the situation escalated, but the judge raised a hand to stop him. Sterling leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You have guts, Miss Hayes. I'll give you that, but guts won't save you from the evidence against you." "The evidence lies," Valerie responded. "Or rather, the people who interpreted it lied, because they never bothered to verify if I could actually do what I said." "And why would we do that?" Harrison interjected from his seat. "Why should the state spend resources verifying the fanciful claims of someone who is clearly trying to avoid the consequences of her actions? Because that is your obligation." Valerie turned to the prosecutor, her voice gaining strength. "Your obligation is to seek the truth, not assume guilt based on prejudice." "Order." Sterling struck his gavel against the desk. "Miss Hayes, you are treading on dangerous ground. I suggest you remain silent before I charge you with contempt." Valerie took a deep breath. She could feel her heart beating so hard she thought everyone in the room could hear it. But she wasn't going to back down. No, this time, she had backed down all her life. "Your Honor," Sarah Miller hastened to intervene, her voice trembling but determined. "I formally request that my client be allowed to demonstrate her linguistic abilities. If she can prove she speaks the languages she claims, that would fundamentally change the nature of this case." Sterling looked at her with a mix of disbelief and annoyance. "Miss Miller, are you really suggesting we turn this court into a language exam?" "I am suggesting we give my client the opportunity to adequately defend herself," Sarah replied, finding a reservoir of courage she didn't know she possessed. "Isn't that what justice represents?" The judge leaned back in his chair, which creaked under his weight. He looked at Valerie for a long moment, his eyes evaluating her as if she were a puzzle he couldn't solve. There was something about this young woman that unsettled him. It wasn't just her audacity. It was the absolute certainty in her eyes. "All right," he said finally, to the surprise of everyone in the room. "I will give you your chance to make a public fool of yourself. But when you fail, and you will fail, I'm going to add charges of contempt and obstruction of justice to your already considerable list of legal problems." He turned to his clerk. "Contact the linguistics department at the State University of New York. I need them to send 10 professors, one specialist in each of the languages Miss Hayes claims to speak." Valerie felt an electric shock run through her body. She would finally have her chance. Finally, someone would listen. Miss Hayes. Sterling looked at her with that mocking smile he had perfected over decades. "I hope you know what you're doing, because when this is over, I'm not only going to declare you guilty of fraud, but the whole world will know exactly what kind of liar you are." "I am not a liar," Valerie responded with a calm but firm voice. "And when this is over, you are going to have to apologize." The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. No one, absolutely no one, spoke to Judge Sterling like that. Silence. The gavel struck again. Sterling looked at Valerie with a mix of fury and something that might have been respect. "This hearing is postponed until the evaluators are present. It will be in 3 days. And believe me, Miss Hayes, those 3 days will be the last of your freedom you enjoy for a long time." As the bailiffs escorted her out of the room, Valerie couldn't help but wonder if she had made the biggest mistake of her life, or if she had finally taken the first step toward the vindication she so longed for. What she didn't know was that the next few days would reveal secrets that would change not only her destiny, but that of everyone present in that courtroom. The metallic clang of the doors closing echoed like thunder in Valerie's ears. The Liberty Street Correctional Facility was a 3-story building that smelled of industrial disinfectant mixed with human despair. The white walls, chipped at the corners, seemed to absorb all the natural light that tried to enter through the small barred windows. Valerie walked down the hallway flanked by 2 officers. Her handcuffs had been removed, but the feeling of oppression remained, now invisible but heavier than any metal. Other inmates watched her from their cells, some with curiosity, others with that vacant look that only prolonged confinement can create. Cell 47C, announced Officer Jessica Torres, a young woman with a professional but not cruel expression. She opened the metal door with a squeak that echoed down the entire corridor. "You have a cellmate. Hope you two get along." Valerie entered, and the door closed behind her with a definitive thud that made her shiver. The cell was small, 2 narrow bunk beds, a small sink, a toilet without privacy, and a window so high it only served to remind them that the outside world existed, but was out of reach. On the lower bunk, a middle-aged woman looked up from a worn book. Maria Sanchez had a face marked by lines that told stories she would probably never share. Her graying hair was pulled back in a tight braid, and her eyes, though tired, still retained a spark of intelligence. "So you're the famous polyglot," Maria said, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "The whole facility is talking about you. The girl who defied Judge Sterling and lived to tell the tale." Valerie sat on the upper bunk, feeling the thin, hard mattress beneath her body. She didn't respond immediately. She was exhausted, not just physically but emotionally. The adrenaline from the hearing had evaporated, leaving only a heavy void in her chesty. "I'm not famous," she finally said. "I'm just someone who got tired of being underestimated." Maria let out a dry laugh. "In here, we're all tired of something. The difference is, most of us already gave up. You still have fire. That's dangerous in a place like this." "Dangerous? Why?" "Because hope hurts more than resignation." Maria closed her book. "Do you really speak 10 languages?" Valerie nodded, looking at the stained ceiling of the cell. 11, actually, but no one asked. 11? Maria sat up, genuinely interested. How is it possible for a girl your age to speak 11 languages? For the first time in days, Valerie felt like talking. Perhaps because Maria didn't look at her with mockery or disdain. Perhaps because in that small, claustrophobic space, they were both just 2 human beings trying to survive. "My grandmother," Valerie began, her voice softening with the memory. "Grandma Lucy. She worked her whole life as a domestic worker for diplomatic families in D. Every time one family left, another arrived. Germans, French, Chinese, Russians, Arabs. She learned bits and pieces of all those languages to communicate, to be indispensable." Maria listened in silence, and Valerie continued. "When my parents died in a bus accident, I was 5 years old. My grandmother took me in and brought me with her to all those houses. While she cleaned, cooked, and ironed, I sat with the children of those families. I played with them, ate with them, learned with them." Her voice broke slightly at the memory. "The diplomats would change every 2 or 3 years. Every time I made a friend, they left. Every time I learned to communicate perfectly in a language, a new family arrived with a different language. But I never stopped learning. It was my way of keeping those memories, those connections alive." "And your grandmother?" Maria asked softly. "She died 2 years ago. Heart attack. 50 years working from dawn till dusk eventually killed her." Valerie closed her eyes tightly. "And I was left alone, without formal education, without certificates to prove what I knew, just with languages in my head, and no way to prove they were real. So you started working as a translator," Maria finished. "I tried to get jobs at official agencies, but they all wanted university degrees, international certifications. No one wanted to give me even a chance to prove what I could do." The frustration was palpable in her voice. "So I started my own business. I offered my services online, charged less than the big agencies, and did impeccable work." "Then why are you here?" Valerie opened her eyes and looked directly at Maria. "Because someone decided it was impossible for a girl without a college education to do what I did. They reported my services as fraud, without even verifying the quality of my work. And now I'm here waiting to prove something I never should have had to prove. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted their conversation. The door opened, and Officer Torres appeared again. Hayes, you have a visitor. Consultation room. Valerie climbed down from the bunk, confused. She hadn't called anyone. She had no one to call. The consultation room was a small space divided by a metal table. Sitting on the other side was Sarah Miller, her public defender. But she wasn't alone. Beside her was a woman Valerie didn't know. Elegant, professional, with a leather briefcase on the table. Valerie, this is Dr. Evelyn Reed, Sarah introduced. She's a forensic psychologist. Prosecutor Harrison requested a psychological evaluation before the next hearing. Valerie felt a knot form in her stomach. Psychological evaluation? Why? Dr. Reed spoke in a calm, professional voice. It's standard procedure in cases where the accused exhibits behaviors that could be considered unusual. Your confrontation with Judge Sterling raised some flags. Flags? Valerie felt indignation rising. Defending myself is unusual behavior? It's not about that, Sarah quickly intervened. Valerie, listen. The prosecutor is trying to build a profile that suggests you have tendencies toward pathological fantasy. They want to argue that you genuinely believe you speak those languages when in reality you don't. That's ridiculous. Valerie slammed her palm on the table. I'm not crazy. No one is saying you are, Dr. Reed maintained her neutral tone. But I need to conduct my evaluation. I'm going to ask you some questions, and I need you to be completely honest with me. For the next hour, Valerie answered question after question about her childhood, about her parents' death, about living with her grandmother, about learning languages, about feeling lonely, about her fears, her dreams, her frustrations. Dr. Reed took meticulous notes, her expression impossible to read. One last question, she finally said. Have you ever felt that people don't understand you, that you live in a different world than others? Valerie thought carefully before answering. Every day of my life. But not because I'm crazy, but because I've lived in worlds most people will never experience. I've spoken in languages most will never learn. I've seen how words can build bridges or raise walls. So yes, I live in a different world, but it's real. It's as real as the prejudice that brought me here. The doctor closed her notebook. Thank you for your cooperation, Valerie. I will submit my report before the hearing. When she left, Sarah approached Valerie, her expression worried. There's something else you need to know. Judge Sterling contacted the State University of New York, but it wasn't just to get evaluators. What do you mean? He investigated your background further. He found something. Sarah pulled some documents from her bag. Years ago, when you were 17, you applied for a scholarship to the Global Language Institute. Do you remember? Valerie nodded slowly. They rejected me. They said my application was unrealistic because I claimed to speak too many languages for my age. Exactly. And Sterling is using that as evidence that you've been lying about your abilities for years. He argues it's a pattern of fraudulent behavior. The room seemed to shrink around Valerie. Every time she tried to move forward, the system pushed her back. Every attempt to prove her worth became another piece of evidence against her. Is there anything else? She asked, fearing the answer. Sarah hesitated before continuing. The evaluators who are coming. Sterling specifically requested the strictest professors, known for being extremely rigorous. They're not coming to give you a fair chance, Valerie. They're coming to dismantle you. The silence that followed was crushing. Valerie could feel the weight of the entire judicial system pressing against her, trying to crush that spark of hope that still burned in her chest. How much time do I have? She finally asked. 2 more days. The hearing is the day after tomorrow. Then I need to use every second. Valerie stood up, her determination renewed despite everything. Sarah, I need you to get me something. Books, study materials, in all the languages you can find. If they're going to make this difficult, then I'm going to prepare like never before in my life. Sarah looked at her with a mix of admiration and sadness. Valerie, even if you prove you speak those languages, the prosecutor has other charges. The clients who reported fraud, the complaints about incorrect translations. Incorrect translations? Valerie interrupted her. What incorrect translations? There are 3 clients who claim that the translations you did contained serious errors that cost them money and reputation. Valerie felt as if she had been punched in the stomach. That's impossible. I checked every translation 3 times. I was meticulous. I would never have delivered something with serious errors. Do you have copies of those translations? All of them, on my computer, but the police confiscated it as evidence. Sarah made a note. I'm going to request access to those files. If we can prove the translations were correct, that would dismantle part of the prosecutor's accusation. When Valerie returned to her cell, Maria was waiting with a curious expression. Bad news. Getting worse and worse. Valerie slumped onto her bunk. Not only do I have to prove I speak 10 languages in front of professors who have already decided I'm lying, I also have to prove that translations I know I did correctly have no errors, and defend myself against a psychological evaluation that will probably paint me as delusional. Maria whistled softly. When you said you had fire, I wasn't kidding. But, Valerie, are you sure you want to go through with this? You could accept a plea bargain, serve a shorter sentence, move on with your life, and give up? Valerie looked at the ceiling. Accept that the world is right and I am wrong? I can't, Maria. If I give up now, I would be betraying my grandmother. All those years of learning, all those kids who have talent, but no papers to prove it. Then rest, Maria said, turning off the cell light. Because in 2 days, you're going to need every ounce of strength you have. In the darkness, Valerie closed her eyes, but she couldn't sleep. Her mind reviewed vocabulary, grammar, idioms in each of the languages she had learned. But more than that, she thought about all the times she had been underestimated, ignored, dismissed. The world was about to see what she was capable of. She only hoped it would be enough. Dawn arrived at the detention center with that heavy silence that only exists in places where freedom is a distant memory. Valerie hadn't slept. Her eyes burned with fatigue, but her mind continued processing verb conjugations, grammatical structures, idiomatic expressions in Mandarin, Arabic, German, French. Maria snored softly in the lower bunk, a comforting sound amidst so much uncertainty. Valerie had spent the night whispering words in a low voice, each language flowing like rivers converging into the ocean of her memory. The sound of approaching footsteps interrupted her concentration. It was too early for breakfast. The metal door opened, and Officer Torres appeared with a serious expression. Hayes, you have a visitor. Consultation room. Now. Maria woke up startled. At this hour? Who visits someone before dawn? Valerie got out of her bunk, her heart beginning to beat faster. She followed Torres down the empty corridors, the echo of their footsteps resonating like war drums. When they reached the consultation room, the surprise on Valerie's face was evident. Sitting on the other side of the table was an Asian American man with an anxious expression and a business briefcase on his lap. She recognized him immediately. Engineer Lee? Valerie whispered incredulously. David Lee rose abruptly, his hands visibly trembling. He was one of the 3 clients who had reported her translations as fraudulent. He worked for a tech company that needed documents translated from English to Mandarin for an expansion in China. Miss Hayes, I need to speak with you. His voice came out in gasps, as if each word cost him physical effort. I don't have much time. My lawyer doesn't know I'm here. Torres closed the door but remained inside. Standard protocol for unofficially authorized visits. What are you doing here? Valerie sat down slowly, trying to process this surreal situation. Lee ran his hands over his face, and Valerie noticed the deep dark circles under his eyes, the tension in his shoulders. I came to tell you the truth I should have told from the beginning. The silence that followed was so dense that Valerie could hear her own pulse. Your translations were perfect. Lee blurted out the words as if he had been holding his breath for months. Every document you translated for my company was impeccable, better than any professional agency we had used before. The partners in Beijing were impressed with the technical accuracy and cultural sensitivity. Valerie felt as if the ground moved under her feet. Then why? Because my boss, the CEO, discovered that I had hired your services without verifying your university credentials. Lee lowered his gaze, shame evident in every line of his face. He threatened to fire me if I didn't find a way to justify why I had spent company funds on an uncertified translator, and he decided to destroy my life to save his job. Valerie felt a mix of fury and vindication growing in her chest. It wasn't that simple. Lee looked up, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. Mr. Robert Sullivan, our company's corporate lawyer, suggested we report the translations as defective. He said it was the only way to recover the money and protect the company from any legal liability. He suggested lying. Valerie's voice rose in pitch. He suggested protecting corporate interests. Lee corrected bitterly. In the business world, Miss Hayes, the truth is secondary to financial survival. But I haven't been able to sleep since I signed that false statement. I have a daughter your age. Every time I look at her, I see your face in the news, being publicly humiliated for something you didn't do. Valerie took a deep breath, trying to control the emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. Why are you telling me this now? Why not before the trial? Because I'm a coward, Lee admitted with a broken voice. Because I needed my job, my salary, my reputation. But seeing what they've done to you, seeing Judge Sterling laughing at you on television, it was too much. My wife told me last night that she couldn't keep living with a man without honor. And she was right. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. Here's everything. Copies of the original translations with the approvals from our partners in Beijing, emails where they specifically praise your work, and my sworn affidavit, admitting that I lied under corporate pressure. Valerie took the envelope with trembling hands. It was heavy, full of pages that could completely change her case. Engineer Lee, do you understand what this means for you? She asked softly. Admitting perjury could send you to prison. I know, Lee smiled sadly. But I'd rather be in prison with my honor intact than free as a liar. My daughter deserves a father she can be proud of. Torres approached the table. Sir, I need to escort you out. This visit is already irregular. Lee stood up, but before leaving, he looked Valerie directly in the eyes. Miss Hayes, you are extraordinary. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. And if you'll permit me a piece of advice, when you're in that courtroom tomorrow, don't just prove you speak those languages, prove why it matters. Prove that real talent doesn't need certificates to be valid. When he left, Valerie remained alone in the room, clutching the envelope as if it were a life raft. Tears she had been holding back for days finally began to fall. They weren't tears of sadness, but of relief, mixed with rage for all she had had to endure because of corporate lies. The door opened again, and Sarah Miller rushed in, her hair disheveled and an expression of controlled panic. Valerie, what was that? Torres called me saying David Lee was here. What did he want? Valerie handed her the envelope. Our salvation. As Sarah frantically reviewed the documents, her eyes widened with each page. This is incredible. With this, we can completely dismantle the fraud charges. We can prove that the translations were correct and that the accusations were fabricated. But will it be enough? Valerie asked. I still have to prove I speak the languages, and the prosecutor will probably say Lee is lying now to help me. You're right. Sarah sat down, her mind working at full speed. We need more. We need to find the other 2 clients who accused you. And how do we do that from here? Sarah pulled out her cell phone. Leave it to me. I have contacts. If Lee had a crisis of conscience, maybe the others will too. For the next few hours, while Valerie was escorted back to her cell, Sarah worked frantically, making calls, sending emails, moving every contact she had in her legal arsenal. Back in the cell, Maria watched Valerie with curiosity. Something changed, she said simply. You have a different expression. One of my accusers came to confess that he lied. Valerie sat down, still processing everything. It turns out my translations were perfect. They falsely accused me to protect corporate interests. Maria whistled softly. The system protecting itself. Same old story. But this time someone had the courage to tell the truth. Valerie looked out the small, high window. He risked everything to clear my name. And that gives you hope? It gives me more than hope. It gives me proof that I'm not crazy, that I'm not wrong, that the world is wrong about me. A metallic sound echoed down the hallway. It was time for the mobile library, a cart that passed twice a week with books for the inmates. A young woman pushed the cart, stopping at each cell. When she reached cell 47, Valerie recognized her. It was Sofia Rodriguez, a girl barely 19 whom she had seen in the dining hall. She had intelligent eyes and that particular sadness of someone who has seen too much, too young. Any books you need? Sofia asked softly. Do you have anything in foreign languages? Valerie asked hopefully. Sofia's eyes lit up. Are you the girl who's going to prove she speaks 10 languages? 11, actually. I have something for you. Sofia looked nervously to both sides of the hallway before pulling out a package wrapped in paper. Your lawyer asked me to bring you this. I shouldn't, but well, I believe in second chances. Valerie unwrapped the package and found 6 books in different languages. Mandarin, Arabic, Russian, German, French, and Portuguese. They weren't ordinary books, but complex technical legal texts. Your lawyer said to practice with these, Sofia whispered. The professors tomorrow are going to try to trip you up with specialized technical vocabulary. How do you know? Because one of them, Professor Arthur Finch, came here for a legal consultation a few days ago. I heard him talking to the director about how to unmask an imposter claiming impossible linguistic skills. Valerie's blood ran cold. Did he say anything else? He said he had prepared specialized technical texts in each language. Medical, legal, scientific vocabulary. things that only someone with years of formal university study could know. Maria sat up in her bunk. That's cheating. They're setting up an exam designed for you to fail. It's not cheating if they never promise to be fair. Valerie opened the first book, her eyes scanning the pages in Mandarin. But I can learn. I've always been able to learn. You have less than 24 hours, Sophia pointed out. How are you going to memorize technical vocabulary in 6 languages in one day? Valerie looked at her with that fierce determination that had kept her alive her whole life. The same way I've done everything else, by not giving up. When Sophia left, Maria watched Valerie open book after book, her concentration absolute. You know what's most impressive about you? Maria said after a long silence. It's not that you speak languages, it's that you never accept defeat as an option. My grandmother used to say, the world will tell you 1,000 times you can't. You only need to prove it once to show that you can. Valerie spent the rest of the day and all night immersed in those books. She barely ate, barely moved. Maria brought her water, reminded her to breathe. But Valerie was in another world, a world of words, meanings, linguistic connections. When the first light of dawn began to filter through the high window, Valerie closed the last book. Her eyes were red, her body trembled with exhaustion, but there was something different in her expression. Ready? Maria asked. Ready, Valerie responded. Torres arrived early. Hayes, it's time. Your lawyer is waiting. Today is the day. As she walked through the corridors toward the exit, other inmates began to bang on their cell doors. It wasn't a threatening sound, but one of support. Many of them had heard her story. Many of them had been judged by what the system believed they were, rather than by what they truly were. Show 'em, someone shouted. Don't let them crush you. Another voice joined. Valerie felt a strange energy running through her body. She wasn't alone. She had never been alone. All those anonymous faces behind the metal doors were reminders that there were more people like her, waiting for an opportunity to prove their truth. Sarah waited for her in the processing area with something unexpected. A suitcase. What is this? Valerie asked. Your future, if all goes well. Sarah opened the suitcase, revealing a professional outfit. You're not walking into that courtroom as a defendant. You're walking in as the professional you are. While Valerie changed, Sarah gave her the latest news. I found the second client. He's willing to testify that his accusation was also false. The third one still isn't responding, but 2 out of 3 is enough to create reasonable doubt. And the psychological evaluation? Sarah grimaced. Dr. Reed submitted her report. It's mixed. It doesn't say you're crazy, but it doesn't completely defend you either. It suggests you have an unconventional personality with high confidence in self-taught abilities. That's just an elegant way of saying they don't trust me. Exactly. That's why you need to be perfect today. Not just good, perfect. The transport vehicle took them to the courthouse. The building looked different in the dawn light, more imposing, more intimidating, like a Roman Colosseum where gladiators fought for their lives. But Valerie was no longer the same person who had entered there days ago. Now she had evidence, she had allies, and most importantly, she had the truth. The courtroom was even fuller than the first time. News cameras filled every permitted corner. Journalists whispered among themselves, and in the first row, 10 professors from the State University of New York waited with expressions ranging from curiosity to open disdain. Judge Sterling entered with the same arrogance as always, but when his gaze met Valerie's, something shifted in his eyes. Perhaps he recognized that this would not be the easy victory he had anticipated. Let the show begin, he murmured, striking his gavel. And so began the day that would change everything. Judge Sterling's gavel echoed like a gunshot in the crowded courtroom. The collective murmur instantly subsided, replaced by a tension so dense that the air itself seemed to vibrate with anticipation. Order in the court. Sterling pronounced the words with that authoritative tone he had perfected over decades on the bench. His eyes swept across the crowd before settling on the 10 professors seated in a special row in front of the bench. Professors from the State University of New York, thank you for your presence. Today we will conduct an evaluation that, frankly, I consider a waste of time, but which the defendant has insisted on carrying out. Valerie stood next to Sarah, her posture erect despite the exhaustion she felt in every fiber of her being. 24 hours without sleep, studying technical vocabulary that most people would take years to master, but she was not most people. Professor Arthur Finch rose, adjusting his glasses with a gesture that conveyed academic superiority. He was a slender man with dark, gelled hair slicked back, and that expression of someone who considers formal knowledge to be the only valid knowledge. Your Honor, He began with a clear, academic voice. My colleagues and I have prepared a series of rigorous evaluations. This is not simply about conversing in different languages, but about demonstrating technical mastery, deep cultural understanding, and specialized translation capability. Proceed, Sterling gestured with his hand, leaning back in his chair as if about to witness a cheap magic show. Finch opened a thick folder. Miss Hayes, we will begin with Mandarin. Professor Kimiko Sato, though a specialist in Japanese, also masters Mandarin and will evaluate this first section. A middle-aged Asian woman stood up. Professor Sato had a serene presence, but her gaze was analytical, dissecting Valerie with each passing second. The professor spoke in perfect, fluid Mandarin, asking Valerie to read a medical text and then explain its meaning in English. She handed her a document. Valerie took the paper. It was a complex medical text about cardiovascular procedures, full of technical terminology that would make any professional translator sweat. The room held its breath. Valerie read the document in silence for 30 seconds. Then, without hesitation, she began to speak in fluid Mandarin. Her pronunciation impeccable, her tones precise. She not only read the text but explained it, adding cultural context about how certain Chinese medical terms differ in concept from Western ones. Then she switched to English without pause, translating not only the words but the deep meaning, explaining the medical implications with a level of detail that left even Professor Sato open-mouthed. The professor murmured something in Mandarin to Finch, commenting that Valerie's pronunciation was perfect and impossible for someone without formal training. I know, Valerie responded in the same language, looking directly at Sato. Then she switched to English. Because I learned from the Chen family, diplomats who lived in Beijing for 6 years. Their young daughter taught me not only the language, but the songs, the games, the ways of thinking. Language is not just words, Professor. It is soul. A murmur ran through the room. Journalist Mark Owens scribbled frantically in his notebook. This was journalistic gold. Next language, Finch said curtly, clearly uncomfortable with what he had just witnessed. German. Professor Carl Schmidt. Schmidt was a corpulent man with a blonde beard and a stern, typically Germanic expression. He stood up and spoke in dense German, with a deliberately complicated accent, asking Valerie to explain the clauses of a legal contract and its legal implications. He handed her a dense legal contract, full of German legal jargon that even native lawyers would find challenging. Valerie read it, and again, her response was more than perfect. She not only translated but identified potential legal problems in the contract and pointed out linguistic ambiguities that could cause disputes, and did it all while fluidly alternating between German and English. Schmidt looked at her with a mix of astonishment and bewilderment. He asked her in German where she had learned all that. Valerie responded in fluid German before translating into English. From the Schneider family. Mr. Schneider was an international lawyer. His wife would let me sit in his office while he worked. I was 10 years old and would read his contracts while he thought I was just drawing. I learned that legal German is like a puzzle where every word has exact weight. Sarah Miller watched with tears in her eyes. This was more than she had hoped for. Valerie was not just demonstrating competence, she was demonstrating mastery. Arabic. Finch practically spat the word. Professor Aisha Rahman. Rahman was an elegant woman with an intelligent, calculating expression. She spoke in classical Arabic, the kind used in religious and academic texts, deliberately archaic and complex. She asked Valerie to read a religious text and explain its deep philosophical meaning. It was a text with complex philosophical commentaries. Valerie closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them, there was something different in her expression. She began to recite in Arabic, her voice taking on that particular melodic cadence of well-spoken language. She not only translated the text, but explained the multiple layers of interpretation, the historical references, the theological debates the passage had generated for centuries. She spoke about how classical Arabic differs from modern Arabic, about the inherent poetry in each verse. Rahman stood up, visibly moved. How is this possible? This requires years of theological study. The Al-Rahman family, Valerie responded softly in English. The father was an imam. He taught me that Arabic is not just a language. It is a way of seeing the universe, that every word has roots, history, connection to other words. It is a language that breathes poetry. Judge Sterling no longer reclined in his chair. He was leaning forward. His expression had changed from mockery to something that might have been involuntary respect. One after another, the professors presented their challenges. Russian with Professor Dmitry Volkov, who asked her to recite classical literature and explain complex literary symbolism. French with culinary and wine terminology so specific that only a sommelier or professional chef would know. Italian with opera and music. Brazilian Portuguese with complex regional idioms. Japanese with multiple writing systems. Korean with intricate levels of formality. Each time Valerie not only met but exceeded expectations, and each time she added that personal dimension, that learning story that revealed not only technical knowledge, but deep understanding and genuine love for each language. When Professor Volkov asked her to explain a passage of classic Russian literature, Valerie not only translated the words, but captured the melancholic soul of the text, explaining historical and emotional contexts that only someone truly immersed in Russian culture could understand. The Ivanov family, she explained. Mr. Ivanov was a literature professor. He would read me Dostoevsky while his wife prepared borscht. I was 12 years old and cried with the stories. He told me that if you can't feel the Russian suffering in the words, you're not truly reading the masters. The professor evaluating French presented her with a text about wines with terminology so specialized that it seemed designed to trip up even professional translators. Valerie not only identified every grape variety, every wine region mentioned, but explained the cultural subtleties of why certain French words to describe wine have no exact translation into English. Monsieur Dubois was a sommelier, she explained with a nostalgic smile. He would let me smell the wines while he worked. He said that the French of wine is liquid poetry. Every word evokes earth, sun, time. It is not translated, it is felt. But then came the moment that would change everything. The last language was Hebrew. Finch, who also mastered Hebrew in addition to English, personally stood for this evaluation. He had saved what he considered his masterpiece for last. Miss Hayes, he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. This last text is particularly challenging. It is an ancient philosophical treatise on ethics and justice, extremely complex even for dedicated scholars. He handed her the document. Valerie began to read, and suddenly her expression changed. It was not confusion or difficulty. It was recognition. Professor Finch, she said slowly. This text. I know this text. You know it? Finch smiled smugly. I highly doubt you've had access to ancient Hebrew philosophical manuscripts. No, the manuscript. Valerie looked up, her eyes shining with something dangerous. I know the translation, because I made it. The silence that fell over the room was absolute. Even the ventilation system seemed to stop humming. Excuse me? Finch blinked. Valerie pointed at the document. 6 years ago, when I was 17, I worked for an online translation service under a pseudonym. An anonymous client requested the translation of this philosophical treatise from ancient Hebrew to modern English. They paid well, but asked for complete anonymity. I spent 3 weeks working on this, researching every word, every concept. It was one of my first professional jobs. She turned to Finch, her voice gaining strength. And you, Professor Finch, published an academic article 4 years ago titled New Interpretations of Hebrew Ethical Texts. I read that article. You used my translation word for word without giving credit. The room erupted in scandalized murmurs. Finch visibly paled. That's an absurd accusation, he stammered. Do you have any proof? I have all my work files, Valerie responded calmly, including translation notes, preliminary versions, correspondence with the client, everything saved on my computer, the same computer that is in the prosecution's possession as evidence. Sarah Miller jumped to her feet. Your Honor, I request immediate access to those digital files. If what my client says is true, this not only demonstrates her competence, but exposes academic plagiarism. Prosecutor Harrison looked like a cornered animal. Your Honor, this is a distraction. It's not relevant to the case. Not relevant? Sterling finally found his voice. Mr. Harrison, if the defendant can prove that one of the evaluators I chose used her work without credit, that is extremely relevant to this case. It shows that she is not only competent, but has been competent for years. He turned to Finch, his expression now cold. Professor Finch, do you have anything to say? Finch opened and closed his mouth like a fish out of water. The other professors looked at him with mixtures of shock and disgust. In the academic world, plagiarism was the unforgivable sin. I received that translation from a colleague. I didn't know it was from an online service. I assumed it was public work. Assumed? Professor Rahman stood up, her voice cutting. Professor Finch, academic protocol requires verifying the source of all material. This is basic. Professor Schmidt added in a severe tone. If this is true, the State University will have to formally investigate. Sterling struck his gavel. Order! Bailiff Jenkins, bring the evidence computer. Now. While they waited, Valerie remained standing, her heart beating strongly, but her expression calm. She had waited 6 years for this moment, 6 years since she saw her work published under another's name. She never thought justice would come this way, but life had strange ways of closing circles. Jenkins returned with the laptop in an evidence bag. The court technician powered it on, and under judicial supervision, Sarah navigated to the files Valerie indicated. There it all was. The preliminary versions of the translation dated 6 years ago. The detailed notes explaining each translation decision, the emails with the client, and most damning, the final version, identical word for word to what Finch had published in his supposedly original article. Sterling examined the files personally, his expression growing darker with each document he reviewed. Finally, he looked up at Finch. Professor, I strongly suggest you contact your union. You're going to need legal representation. He turned to the other 9 professors. Does anyone else have doubts about Miss Hayes' linguistic competence? One by one, each professor shook their head. Professor Rahman even stood up. Your Honor, in my 20 years evaluating linguistic competence, I have never seen anyone with the mastery this young woman has demonstrated today. She not only speaks these languages, she lives them. She understands them at levels most academics can only aspire to. And she did it without resources, without privilege, only with determination and genuine love for learning. Rahman's words resonated in the room. Sterling leaned back in his chair, running a hand over his face. For the first time in decades, he seemed truly unsure of how to proceed. Mr. Harrison, he said finally, do you have anything else to present? The prosecutor stood up slowly. He knew he had lost. Your Honor, in light of these developments, and considering that 2 of the 3 plaintiff clients have withdrawn their accusations and confessed to lying under corporate pressure, the prosecution requests to withdraw all charges. The murmur in the room turned into a roar. Sterling struck his gavel repeatedly. Order! Order in my court! When silence returned, Sterling looked at Valerie for a long moment. In his eyes was something that had never been there before. Miss Hayes, he began, his voice unusually soft. This court owes you an apology. I owe you an apology. I allowed prejudice to cloud my judgment. I assume that extraordinary talent requires institutional validation when you have demonstrated that true talent transcends institutions. He paused, as if the next words cost him physical effort to utter. All charges against you are withdrawn. You are free of all accusation. Furthermore, I order that your computer and all your personal effects be returned to you immediately. He struck the gavel one last time. This case is closed. The room erupted in applause. Sarah hugged Valerie, both crying. Journalists ran toward the exits to publish the news. The professors surrounded Valerie, offering apologies, job offers, academic opportunities. But Valerie could only think of one thing. Finally, after a lifetime of being underestimated, the world had heard her voice, and that voice had spoken in 11 languages. The doors of the Liberty Street Correctional Facility opened with a metallic creak that sounded like celestial music. Valerie took her first step as a free woman in days that had felt like years. The afternoon sun hit her face with an intensity that almost made her recoil. Freedom, vindication, justice. But the scene awaiting her outside was not the tranquility she had imagined. Dozens of journalists pounced on her like waves breaking against the shore, cameras flashing, microphones extending like tentacles, voices shouting questions that blended into an incomprehensible chaos. Miss Hayes, how do you feel? Is Valerie going to sue Judge Sterling? Tell us about Professor Finch. Is it true you speak 11 languages? Sarah appeared at her side, forming a protective shield with her body as they tried to push their way toward the waiting vehicle. But before they could advance 2 yards, an elegant woman stood directly in their path. She was of imposing stature, with perfectly styled silver hair, a suit that screamed power and money. Linda Harrington, according to the corporate ID, hanging around her neck. CEO of Harrington Global Translation Services, Miss Hayes. Her voice cut through the surrounding noise with natural authority. I'm Linda Harrington. I need to speak with you now. Miss Harrington, my client has just been released, Sarah intervened. It's not an appropriate time. I understand perfectly, but what I have to tell you cannot wait. Harrington looked directly at Valerie, completely ignoring Sarah. Your case has generated international attention. I have 17 job offers from different countries for you, and something more important, information about your grandmother, which I believe you'll want to hear. Valerie stopped dead in her tracks. My grandmother? What do you know about my grandmother? Not here. Harrington pointed toward a black limousine discreetly parked half a block away. 5 minutes of your time. If you want to leave afterwards, I will personally take you wherever you wish. Sarah squeezed Valerie's arm in warning, but there was something in Harrington's eyes that was not threatening. It was urgency mixed with respect. All right, Valerie agreed. 5 minutes. Inside the limousine, away from the chaos of journalists, Harrington handed her a leather folder. 20 years ago, I was director of human resources at one of the country's most prestigious translation agencies. Your grandmother, Lucy Hayes, applied for a position. We rejected her. Valerie felt a pang of pain in her chest. Why are you telling me this? Because we made the same mistake the system made with you. Lucy spoke 6 languages fluently, but had no university degrees. We rejected her without even properly evaluating her. She wrote me a letter after that interview. A letter I kept for 2 decades because I was too ashamed to reread it. Harrington took a yellowed envelope from the folder. The handwriting was her grandmother's. Valerie would recognize it anywhere. Read it, Harrington insisted. With trembling hands, Valerie opened the envelope and began to read. Her grandmother's words flowed from the page like a river of wisdom and pain. Dear Miss Harrington, I don't blame you for rejecting me. The world operates on papers, not on abilities. But I want you to know that I will dedicate my life to ensuring my granddaughter never has to beg for opportunities she deserves. I will teach her everything I know, and someday, when she succeeds, I hope you remember that talent does not need external validation to be real. Valerie finished reading with tears rolling down her cheeks. Her grandmother had always known, always planned to prepare her for a world that would reject them both. When I saw your case in the news, Harrington continued softly, I knew immediately who you were, Lucy's granddaughter, the child she spoke of in that letter. And I realized I had the opportunity to correct a mistake I made 2 decades ago. What do you want from me? Valerie asked directly. I want to hire you, not as a common translator, but as director of unconventional talent. Your job will be to identify and recruit people like you, people with extraordinary abilities but without traditional credentials, people the system ignores. The offer was tempting, almost too good to be true. But something in Harrington's expression told Valerie there was more. What else? She pressed. Harrington smiled slightly. You are perceptive. Good, there is something else. Your grandmother worked for many diplomatic families, as you know. But there is one family in particular, the Morrisons, for whom she worked during the last 5 years of her life. They were British diplomats. They left the country abruptly 3 years ago, and they left something for you. Something your grandmother asked them to keep until you were ready. Mr. Morrison contacted me yesterday after seeing your case in the news. He is in the city. He wants to meet with you. Before Valerie could respond, her phone, recently returned by the police, began to ring incessantly. Missed calls, text messages, social media notifications exploding. One message in particular caught her attention. It was from an unknown number with an international prefix. Miss Hayes, I am Agent Samuel Cross from the International Refugee Organization. Your story has resonated with millions. We have a proposal that could change lives. Please, contact me urgently. Sarah, who had been checking her own phone, looked up with an expression of shock. Valerie, you need to see this. She showed her screen. The video of the hearing had gone viral. More than 15 million views in less than 6 hours. The hashtag #JusticeForValerie was trending worldwide. But it wasn't just that. There was another video published just minutes ago. Someone had leaked the security recordings from the detention center. In them, Valerie was clearly seen studying all night, murmuring in different languages, preparing with a determination that bordered on superhuman. The whole world is talking about you, Sarah murmured. You're a symbol now. I don't want to be a symbol, Valerie responded with a tired voice. I just want to live my life. Too late for that. Harrington intervened pragmatically. Now you have a platform. The question is, what are you going to do with it? The phone rang again. This time it was a number Valerie recognized. Maria, her cellmate. Valerie, I need you to come. It's urgent. Maria, what's wrong? It's about the center's director. It turns out he also has secrets, and I think they're connected to your grandmother, but I can't talk on the phone. You have to come. The call cut off abruptly. Valerie looked at Sarah with increasing alarm. Something's wrong. Maria sounded scared. Before they could decide what to do, another figure appeared at the limousine window. An older man, in his late 60s, with a gentle but urgent expression, tapped the glass softly. Harrington lowered the window. Dr. Ruiz, Mrs. Harrington, thank you for contacting me. The man spoke with a refined British accent. Miss Hayes, I'm Dr. Fernando Ruiz. I worked as the Morrison family's personal physician for years. I also attended to your grandmother Lucy in her last months. Valerie got out of the limousine, feeling the world spin too fast. You knew my grandmother? I knew her very well, and there are things about her death that you need to know. Things she made me promise to tell you when the time was right. What things? Dr. Ruiz looked nervously around. Not here. There are people who would prefer certain information to remain buried. Your grandmother did not die of a simple heart attack, Miss Hayes. There were complications that she kept secret, complications related to something she discovered while working for the Morrisons. Valerie's heart began to beat rapidly. What did she discover? Documents, sensitive information about trafficking networks that use diplomatic families as cover. Your grandmother reported them to the appropriate authorities, but died before she could formally testify. Valerie's world stopped. Are you saying my grandmother was? I don't know for certain, the doctor interrupted quickly. What I do know is that she left evidence stored away, evidence that the Morrisons protected after her death. And now that you are in the public eye, there are people who will want to make sure that evidence never comes to light. Sarah placed herself protectively beside Valerie. Dr. Ruiz, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof? I have Lucy's complete medical records, and I have the letters she wrote to me in her last days. Letters where she specifically mentions that if anything happened to her, I should contact her granddaughter when she was strong enough to handle the truth. He pulled a thick envelope from his briefcase. This is just the beginning, Miss Hayes. Your grandmother documented everything meticulously. Names, dates, trafficking routes. She stored it all in a safety deposit box at an international bank, and you are the only person authorized to open it. Valerie took the envelope, feeling its weight, not just physical, but emotional. Where is that box? Geneva, Switzerland, Helvetia International Bank. Your grandmother gave me the exact instructions before she died. She said, when Valerie proves to the world what she is capable of, when she can no longer be ignored or silenced, then she will be ready to know the whole truth. The words resonated in the silence of the limousine. All her life, Valerie had thought her grandmother was simply a domestic worker who loved languages. But now she was discovering she had been much more. A woman who had seen injustices and had had the courage to confront them, even knowing the price she might pay. Is there anything else? Dr. Ruiz added, his expression becoming even more serious. The third client who accused you, the one who never withdrew his charges, his name is Richard Blackwood. He works for a private security corporation with deep connections in diplomatic circles. I don't think it's a coincidence that he was the only one who maintained the accusations until the end. Are you suggesting my accusation was orchestrated? Valerie felt a chill run down her spine. I'm suggesting that when your case became public, certain people saw an opportunity to discredit you before you could become a problem. Before you could discover what your grandmother knew. Sarah grabbed her phone. We need police protection now! But before she could make the call, a black van stopped abruptly in front of the limousine. A middle-aged man with a serious expression, a federal ID hanging from his neck, stepped out. I'm Agent Samuel Cross, Miss Hayes. I need you to come with me. Your life may be in danger. How did you know where to find me? Valerie asked, her survival instinct activating. Because we've been monitoring communications related to your case, and we just intercepted a very disturbing conversation. There's an active contract out on you. Someone wants to make sure you never reach Geneva. The world Valerie had just regained was about to become much more dangerous, and the answers she sought were thousands of miles away in a safe deposit box that contained secrets someone was willing to kill to protect. The decision was instantaneous. Valerie looked Agent Cross directly in the eyes. I'm not going anywhere until I speak with Maria. She needs me, Miss Hayes. You don't understand the gravity, Cross insisted. There are dangerous people looking for you right now. And there's a friend who risked everything to help me when no one else would. Valerie responded firmly. I won't abandon her now. Sarah touched her arm. Valerie, maybe you should listen to the agent. I'll go with you, Doctor. Ruiz intervened unexpectedly. If there's a connection between the center's director and what your grandmother discovered, you need to know it, and I can help protect you. Harrington closed her phone. I have contacts in private security. I can have a team there in 10 minutes. Cross sighed, recognizing he had lost this battle. All right, but I'm coming with you, and if I see anything suspicious, we leave immediately. 15 minutes later, they were back at the Liberty Street Correctional Facility. The building Valerie had left, with relief, now greeted her with a sense of menace she hadn't felt before. The fluorescent lights flickered, casting unsettling shadows in the white corridors. Officer Daniela Cortez, a young, kindly guard who had always been gentle with Valerie, awaited them at the entrance. "Miss Hayes, thank you for coming," she whispered nervously. "Maria is very agitated. She keeps saying the director has something to do with your grandmother. I don't understand what she means, but she insists she'll only talk to you." "Where is Director Mendez?" Cross asked in a professional tone. "In his office. He's been making calls all day." "Since Miss Hayes' case went viral, he's extremely nervous." Cortez guided them through corridors Valerie knew too well. When they reached cell 47C, Maria was sitting on her bunk, hugging her knees with an expression that mixed fear and determination. Maria jumped up when the door opened. "Thank God you came. I thought maybe you wouldn't, after everything you went through here." "Maria, what's wrong? What did you discover?" Maria looked nervously at the others present. Cross showed his federal identification. "Anything you say here is protected. If you have relevant information, we need to hear it." Maria took a deep breath. 2 days ago, I was cleaning near Director Mendez's office. The door was ajar, and I heard a phone conversation. He was talking to someone about Valerie. He said things like, "The old woman was a problem, and the granddaughter can't know what she found." Valerie's heart stopped. The old woman. He was referring to my grandmother? That's what I thought at first, but I wasn't sure. Then, today, after you were released, he was even more agitated. He made another call. This time I heard clearly. He mentioned the name Lucy Hayes, and something about documents that should never have reached her granddaughter's hands. Dr. Ruiz stepped forward. "Maria, did he mention anything about the Morrisons or about international networks?" "Yes." Maria nodded vigorously. "He said the Morrisons were fools for keeping those papers, that they should have destroyed them when they had the chance." Cross already had his phone out, making urgent calls, requesting forensic teams, arrest warrants, full investigations. But Valerie could barely hear anything beyond the roar of blood in her ears. She felt only one thing: rage. Rage that her grandmother had been put in danger. Rage that possibly her death had not been natural. Rage that even now, years later, the shadows of the past still pursued them. "I need to talk to him," she said with a dangerously calm voice. "I need to talk to Mendez now." "Valerie, that's not prudent," Sarah warned. "I don't care about prudence." Valerie turned to Cross. "You're a federal agent. You can make it official. I need answers about my grandmother." Cross considered for a moment. Then he nodded. "I'll ask some questions, but you come with me, and if it gets dangerous, we leave." Director Augusto Mendez's office was on the 3rd floor. He was a thick-set man with thinning hair and the kind of nervousness that only guilt can generate. When Cross entered, showing his federal identification, the color drained from his face. "Agent, how can I help you?" His voice trembled slightly. "Director Mendez, I have some questions about Lucy Hayes." The director blinked repeatedly. "Lucy Hayes? I don't know anyone by that name." "Liar." Valerie walked into the office, ignoring Cross's attempt to stop her. "My grandmother worked cleaning this facility during the last year of her life. You knew her, and it seems you also knew what she had discovered." Mendez stood up abruptly. "Miss Hayes, I don't know what you're talking about." "Then let me refresh your memory." Cross pulled out his recorder. "I have witnesses who heard you talking about the old woman, and about documents. Do you want to explain that to me?" The director began to sweat, visibly. His eyes darted between Cross, Valerie, and the door, like a trapped animal looking for escape. I just worked here. I didn't know anything about what she did outside." "But you did know something." Valerie leaned over the desk. "My grandmother died 2 years ago. Her death was sudden, convenient, just before she could testify about what she had discovered." "I had nothing to do with her death," Mendez shouted, losing his composure. "It was her heart. The doctor said so." "So you did know her," Cross observed coldly. "A moment ago you said you didn't know anyone by that name." Mendez slumped into his chair, defeated. All right. I knew Lucy. She worked here cleaning for months. She was a good woman, quiet. But one day, she came to me with information. Dangerous information." "What information?" Valerie felt tears threatening to escape, but she held them back with willpower. She said that while working for diplomatic families, she had seen things. Documents about people being moved illegally, families used as cover for criminal operations. She showed me copies. She asked me to help her report it to the appropriate authorities. "And you did." Mendez lowered his gaze, unable to meet Valerie's eyes. "I told her I would, but I was scared. The people involved were powerful. They had connections. They had money. So, I reported her intentions to someone else. The silence that fell in the office was heavier than any verbal accusation. You betrayed her, Valerie whispered the words, barely audible. My grandmother trusted you, and you sold her out. I didn't know what they were going to do. Mendez sobbed openly now. They just told me they would keep an eye on her, that they would make sure she didn't cause problems. I never thought they would kill her. Valerie finished the sentence. I don't know if they did. Mendez was openly sobbing now. Her death was natural according to all reports, but I always wondered. I always lived with that doubt. Cross was already on the phone, requesting forensic teams, arrest warrants, full investigations, but Valerie could barely hear anything beyond the roar of blood in her ears. Doctor. Ruiz placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Valerie, there's something else you need to know. Something your grandmother gave me before she died. From his briefcase, he pulled out a small, time-worn envelope. She asked me to give it to you when you were ready. I think this is the moment. With trembling hands, Valerie opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in her grandmother's hand, the same handwriting she had seen in cookbooks, on shopping lists, in messages of maternal love. My dearest Valerie, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer with you. It means Dr. Ruiz kept his promise, and it means you are finally strong enough to know the whole truth. Throughout your life, I taught you languages. I taught you that words have power, that communication builds bridges, that understanding others is understanding the world. But I never told you why it was so important to me that you learned. When I was young, I witnessed injustices I could not stop. I saw people being exploited, families being separated, innocents being harmed, and I could do nothing because I had no power, no voice, no way to be heard. But you, my love, you have something I never had. You have the gift of tongues. You can speak for those who have no voice. You can translate not only words, but injustices into justice, silence into truth. The documents I left in Geneva are not just evidence of crimes. They are the voices of people who need to be heard, and you are the only one who can give them that voice. I know the path will be difficult. I know there will be people who will try to silence you, as they tried to silence me. But I also know that you are stronger than I ever was, because you not only have knowledge, you have courage. Do not cry for me, my little one. If my heart stops before I can see your triumph, I will know it was because it gave everything to prepare you. And that is enough. Every language I taught you, every story I shared, every moment we spent together, was preparing you for this moment, for when the world would finally listen to you. Now go to Geneva, open that box, tell those stories, give voice to the silenced. And when you do, you will know that your grandmother is proud, not because you speak 10 languages or 20, but because you chose to use your gift for something greater than yourself. I love you, my child. I always loved you. I will always love you. Your grandmother, Lucy. Valerie finished reading, and the tears she had held back for days finally flowed freely. They were not tears of sadness only, but of understanding, of purpose, of love that transcended even death. Maria hugged her, crying too. Sarah had tears rolling down her cheeks. Even Cross, the hardened federal agent, had to discreetly wipe his eyes. Dr. Ruiz spoke softly. Your grandmother knew her time was limited. Her heart was weak, and the stress of what she had discovered worsened it. But she didn't stop. She kept documenting, kept collecting evidence, kept fighting, because she knew you would continue her work. Valerie folded the letter carefully, holding it against her chest as if it were her grandmother's embrace. I'll go to Geneva, she said with a clear voice despite the tears. I'll finish what she started. You won't go alone. Harrington entered the office, her expression determined. My company has offices in Switzerland. You'll have all the protection and resources you need. And I'm coming with you, Sarah added, as your lawyer and your friend. Me too, Maria said surprisingly. I'm being released in 2 days. And after what they did to your grandmother, I want to help. Cross closed his phone. The FBI is interested in this case. You'll have federal protection during the trip. And Mendez, he turned to the sobbing director, you are under arrest for obstruction of justice and conspiracy. As Mendez was escorted out of his office in handcuffs, Valerie felt something change inside her. She was no longer just a young woman trying to prove her worth. She was the heir to a legacy of courage and justice. Her grandmother had planted seeds of hope in the form of languages. Now, those seeds had grown into something more powerful, a voice that could not be silenced. At that moment, Harrington's phone rang. She answered briefly, her expression turning serious. It's Mrs. Morrison. She's in the city. She says she has something else your grandmother left for you, something she didn't even trust to the bank. She wants to meet you tonight." Valerie nodded. Each revelation brought her closer to fully understanding who her grandmother had been and what she had sacrificed. "Then let's go," she said. "There's no time to lose." Because somewhere, in a safety deposit box in Geneva, truths awaited that would change lives, and Valerie Hayes was ready to give them a voice. The hotel where Mrs. Margaret Morrison was staying was one of those places that whispered stories of lives lived with elegance and purpose. Valerie, accompanied by Sarah, Dr. Ruiz, and Harrington, was received in a suite overlooking the illuminated city. Margaret Morrison was a woman with perfectly styled silver hair, blue eyes that had seen too much of the world, and that dignity that only comes from a life dedicated to serving something greater than oneself. When she saw Valerie, her eyes filled with tears. "You are exactly as she said you would be," Margaret whispered, taking Valerie's hands in hers. "Lucy spoke of you every day. She said you were her masterpiece, her living legacy. Mrs. Morrison, what do you know about my grandmother?" Margaret invited them to sit. Her hands trembled slightly as she prepared tea. "Your grandmother Lucy worked for my family for 5 years. She wasn't just our employee, she was part of our family. My husband was a British ambassador, and Lucy was with us at every posting. But what no one knew is that Lucy had a special gift." "What gift?" "She could read people, understand intentions, and her knowledge of languages allowed her to overhear conversations that others believed private." Margaret paused, her eyes distant with memories. "One night, during a diplomatic reception at our home, Lucy was serving when she overheard a conversation in Russian between 2 diplomats. They were discussing a network that used diplomatic families as cover to move people against their will. The silence in the room was absolute. Lucy came to me that night, trembling. She told me everything. My husband and I were horrified. He wanted to report it immediately, but Lucy insisted on gathering more evidence first. For months, she meticulously documented everything: names, dates, routes. She used her invisible position to be present at meetings where no one thought she understood what they were saying. And why didn't they report it when they had enough evidence? Margaret stood up and went to a small chest on the table. "Because we discovered that the network had connections at high levels of multiple governments. We didn't know who to trust. Then, my husband died. A sudden heart attack during a diplomatic meeting. Her voice broke. Officially, it was his heart. But I've always wondered. Just before he died, he had said he was ready to expose everything, regardless of the consequences. Lucy was afraid after that," Margaret continued. "Afraid that the same thing would happen to her, but not afraid for herself, but afraid to leave you alone, Valerie. So she gave me this. She opened the chest and made me promise that I would only give it to you when you were strong enough, when the world was ready to listen to you." From the chest, she pulled out a small external hard drive and a thick envelope. "Here's everything. Audio recordings of diplomatic meetings where these operations were discussed, photographs, original documents, and most importantly, testimonies from victims Lucy met and secretly helped for years." Valerie took the hard drive with trembling hands. It was small, but it contained the weight of entire lives. "Is there anything else?" Margaret added softly. "The box in Geneva contains the documentary evidence. But this," she pointed to the drive, "contains the voices, the real stories of people who were silenced. Lucy recorded them with permission in their own languages. She knew that you would be the one who would finally translate them, who would give them a voice to the world." That night, Valerie barely slept. With headphones on, she listened hour after hour to the recordings. Voices in Mandarin, in Arabic, in Russian, in languages she knew intimately. Stories of separated families, of broken promises, of destroyed hopes. And in each recording, at the end, was her grandmother's voice, her maternal warmth, promising that their stories would be told. When dawn broke, Valerie had dry tears on her cheeks, but renewed fire in her soul. The flight to Geneva departed the next day. Valerie traveled with Sarah, Maria, who had been released as promised, Harrington, and a security escort coordinated by Agent Cross. The FBI had discovered that Richard Blackwood, the third client, was actually a private security operative hired to discredit Valerie before she became a public voice. He was arrested while attempting to leave the country. Geneva greeted them with gray skies, but with promises of justice. The Helvetia International Bank was a fortress of marble and steel, designed to protect secrets for generations. In a private room with a Swiss notary present, Valerie opened safe deposit box number 4721. Inside were meticulously organized folders, each labeled in her grandmother's handwriting. with names, dates, locations. But what most impacted Valerie was finding at the bottom of the box a photo album. Photos of herself through the years. Her first day of school, learning to write in Arabic, reading books in French. Each photo had a note from her grandmother on the back. The last photo was of Valerie at 16, smiling while holding a certificate from an online translation course. The note read, "The day I knew you were ready, it was only a matter of time until the world was ready too." Valerie hugged the album against her chest, sobbing. Sarah hugged her, then Maria, then everyone present. It was a moment of pain and love, intertwined so deeply that there were no words in any language to adequately describe it. The following weeks were a whirlwind. Valerie, with the help of Sarah and an international legal team, presented all the evidence to the International Court of Justice. The case caused an earthquake in diplomatic circles. 3 international networks were dismantled. 17 corrupt officials were arrested in 6 different countries. But more important than the arrests was what Valerie did with the recordings. She created a documentary titled Voices of the Silenced. In it, she personally translated each testimony, giving voice to those who had been silenced. She not only translated words, but captured emotions, cultural contexts, the essential humanity of each story. The documentary went viral globally. More than 100 million views in the first week. Governments were forced to respond. Policies changed, lives were saved. Ambassador Klaus Zimmermann of the United Nations personally contacted Valerie. "Miss Hayes, your work has exposed injustices that governments ignored for decades. On behalf of the United Nations, I would like to offer you a position as a special human rights translator. Your job would be to give voice to people the world needs to hear." Valerie accepted, but with one condition, that the position include a program to identify and train other young talents without formal credentials. Real talent, she argued, should not need institutional validation to be recognized. Her proposal was unanimously accepted. 6 months later, Valerie stood in the same courtroom where she had once been humiliated. But this time, she was not an accused, but a guest speaker at an international conference on linguistic justice. Judge Arthur Sterling was present at the audience. He had retired early after his handling of Valerie's case generated investigations into other cases where he may have allowed prejudices to affect his judgment. At the end of her speech, Sterling approached her. "Miss Hayes," his voice was humble, so different from the arrogant man he had been. "There is no apology sufficient for how I treated you, but I want you to know that your case changed my life. It forced me to confront prejudices I didn't even know I had. I am now working with the judicial system to implement reforms that prevent other judges from making the same mistakes I made." "Judge Sterling," Valerie responded, "forgiveness does not erase the harm, but it opens paths to something better. Your recognition means more than your apologies, because it shows that people can change, learn, grow." They shook hands, and in that gesture there was healing, not only for them, but as a symbol of what the judicial system could become. Maria had rebuilt her life with Harrington's help. She now worked coordinating rehabilitation programs for unjustly incarcerated individuals. "You gave me hope when I had none," she told Valerie. "Now I want to give that same hope to others." Sarah Miller received national recognition as Public Defender of the Year, but what made her most proud were not the awards, but the letters she received from grateful clients, inspired by her passionate defense of Valerie. Professor Finch resigned from his position after a university investigation confirmed multiple cases of plagiarism. His downfall served as a warning to other academics about the importance of integrity. David Lee, the engineer who had had the courage to confess first, established a foundation dedicated to supporting unconventional talents. "Valerie taught me that honor is worth more than money or position," he explained in an interview. Sophia, the young woman from the detention center who had risked her job to help Valerie, received a full scholarship to study social work, sponsored by the program Valerie had established. 1 year to the day Valerie had been arrested, she stood in front of the cemetery where her grandmother was buried. She had traveled from Geneva specifically for this moment. She placed fresh flowers on the grave and knelt. "Grandma," she spoke softly, "I finished what you started. The voices you helped protect are now being heard by the whole world. The networks you documented were dismantled. The people who tried to silence us failed." A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the nearby trees, as if nature itself were listening. "But more than that, Grandma, I finally understood why you taught me all those languages. It wasn't just about words. It was about empathy, about connection, about understanding that every person, regardless of their language or origin, has a story that deserves to be heard." Valerie took the photo album from her bag, the one she had found in the safe deposit box. She opened it to the last page where she had pasted a new photo. It was of herself, standing in front of the United Nations, surrounded by people from all corners of the world, people whose stories she had translated, whose voices she had amplified. Look, Grandma, this is what we built together. Your sacrifice was not in vain. Your legacy lives in every person who now has a voice thanks to what you taught me. As the sun set, Valerie stayed there, feeling a peace she hadn't felt in years. Her grandmother had sown seeds of hope in the form of languages. Those seeds had grown into a garden of justice that would continue to flourish long after both of them were gone. The next day, Valerie gave her first class in the program she had created. 30 young people from diverse backgrounds, all with extraordinary talents but without formal credentials, looked at her with hope and admiration. My grandmother used to tell me, Valerie began, that talent doesn't need certificates to be real, it just needs opportunities to shine. You are here because each of you has a unique gift. My job is not to teach you, but to help you recognize the power you already have within. A young woman in the front row raised her hand. Miss Hayes, how do we know we're good enough? Valerie smiled, remembering when she herself had asked that question. Why are you here? Because you dared to try when the world told you that you couldn't. That determination, that courage, is more valuable than any university degree. Months turned into years. Valerie's program grew, expanding to 20 countries. Thousands of young talents found opportunities they otherwise never would have had. Some became translators, others cultural mediators, others human rights activists. But all shared something in common: the belief that true talent transcends credentials, and that every voice, no matter how silenced it may have been, deserves to be heard. At a special ceremony at the United Nations, Valerie received the International Human Rights Award. As she held the recognition, she thought of all the people who had made this moment possible. Her grandmother, who had sacrificed everything. Maria, who had believed in her when she was at her lowest point. Sarah, who had fought for her against all odds. Lee, who had found the courage to tell the truth. In her acceptance speech, Valerie didn't speak about her achievements. She spoke about her grandmother. Lucy Hayes never had a university degree. She never received official recognition for her work. But she understood something that the world is only just beginning to learn. That the value of a person is not measured in certificates, but in character, not in credentials, but in courage. Her voice broke slightly with emotion. This award is not mine, it is hers. It is for every person who was ever underestimated, ignored, silenced. It is a reminder that extraordinary talent can come from ordinary places, and that sometimes the most powerful people are those the world never noticed. The ovation that followed lasted a full 5 minutes. People from all over the world, connected virtually, applauded not only Valerie, but all the Lucys of the world, all the grandmothers, mothers, invisible workers who had planted seeds of hope without knowing if they would ever flourish. That night, Valerie was in her apartment in Geneva, looking out at the illuminated city. Her phone rang. It was an unknown number. Miss Hayes, I'm Maria. I'm 16 years old and I live in a small town in Arizona. I saw your documentary. I speak 5 languages that I learned from tourists visiting my town. Everyone tells me it's impossible for it to be true without formal education. But you gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, I can also have a future. Can I apply to your program? Valerie smiled with tears in her eyes. Of course you can, Maria. Tell me your story. And as she listened to Maria's story, Valerie understood that this was her grandmother's true legacy. Not the dismantled networks or the awards received, but each individual life that was touched, each talent that was recognized, each voice that was finally heard. The cycle continued, hope multiplied, and somewhere, Valerie was sure, her grandmother Lucy was smiling. Because in the end, this was never a story about languages or injustice or trials. It was a story about love, the love of a grandmother who prepared her granddaughter to change the world. Love that transcended death, time, and circumstance. And that love, translated into 11 languages and 1,000 acts of courage, had illuminated the world.